The truth about tornadoes in Tennessee, what you should know. We get a lot of questions from out-of-state buyers about tornadoes. They want to know if Tennessee gets many tornadoes, how often they happen, and is it something they should be worried about? Well, the quick answers are yes, depends on what part of the state you're in, and no. But that also depends on what part of the state you pick. So let me explain. I understand why people ask. Tornadoes can do a lot of damage if they touch down. Some of the footage you see is downright terrifying. I lived in the Chattanooga area during the historic 2011 outbreak. Almost 75 people died in the area, which included northeast Alabama, northwest Georgia, and southwest Tennessee. That was hopefully a once-in-a-lifetime event and was very rare, but after seeing the damage firsthand, I understand why people would want to know more. So I did some research and put this video together to answer your questions. I used NOAA, weather.gov, ESRI, and FEMA sites for my research. Tennessee does get its fair share of tornadoes. However, compared to much of the U.S., Tennessee doesn't really stand out. In fact, Tennessee isn't even in the top 15 states for tornado activity. Top spot goes to Texas, which has over 5 times the number that Tennessee sees in a year. In fact, 18 states are ahead of Tennessee in annual tornado count over the past 30 years. So yes, Tennessee does have tornadoes. On to the question of how often they happen. The most common months for tornadoes in the southeast is March through May. The southern and central plains are more likely to see them in May and June, while the northern plains and the Midwest see them most during the summer. However, all 50 states have had tornadoes at some point, and they can happen in the U.S. during any month, pretty much. Looking at National Weather Service data over the last 70 years, East Tennessee averaged 3 tornadoes a year, Middle Tennessee 9, while West Tennessee 5 per year. In 2022, there were just 5 in the entire state, but that was a slow year. On average, the state averages around 17 to 18 tornadoes every year in the long term. However, since 1995, the numbers have been increasing nationally. Since then, Tennessee has averaged 30 a year, 7 in the West, 17 in Middle Tennessee, and 6 in Eastern Tennessee. One thing you should understand though, Tennessee is a relatively big state. For example, Eastern Tennessee includes everything from Chattanooga, which sits on the Georgia border, to Bristol, which sits on the Virginia border. There's a stark difference when you move from south to north. Hamilton County, which includes Chattanooga, has had 28 tornadoes since 1950. Sullivan County, which includes Bristol and Kingsport, has had 4. That's in over 70 years. So again, where you live within the state has everything to do about your risk for being close to one. Looking at this map, you can see the hot spots when it comes to tornadoes in the state. It's pretty clear that the true hot spots are Memphis and the Nashville metro and surrounding areas. In general, it looks like activity gets lower the further east you go and the further north. The exception is that area surrounding Nashville. There's also a chunk around Chattanooga, which includes Bradley and Hamilton counties, that also have seen a lot of activity. In comparison to the 56 tornadoes that Memphis and Nashville-Davidson County have each had, Unicoi County, just east of Johnson City in northeast Tennessee, has had 2. Again, that's in 70 years. So yes, Tennessee does have tornadoes. Your likelihood of being directly affected by one, however, is extremely low, particularly if you live in the areas less likely to have them. I know they're scary, but the odds are extremely low that you'll ever see one. As part of my research, I ran across a FEMA site that shows the risk of being affected by a natural disaster within the U.S. It overlays the risk index on the map, and you can see those parts of the country that have the higher risk of experiencing natural disasters versus those with the lower. The darker the color, the higher the risk. The site lets you pull out each natural disaster individually too. Here you can see the hot spots nationally for tornado risk. Basically, from Denver, Colorado and going east, there's a mixture of risk. Some relatively low and some very high. You can see Tennessee on the map here and all the other parts of the U.S. that share that risk. Of course, most of California has a low risk and all up the West Coast. But when you bring in all the other risk of natural disaster, you can see that our part of this country is actually much less likely to be affected than most of California, the West Coast, and many other metro areas throughout the U.S. When you factor in the risk of hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, drought, flooding, etc., our part of the country is relatively low risk. So if tornadoes are a concern for you, I wouldn't personally be worried about living in the state in particular, but you can always decide on one of the areas that are less susceptible. If you're worried about natural disasters in particular, know that most of Tennessee is a good choice. Thanks so much for watching. If you've thought about moving to Tennessee and would like to know more, watch our video here about the pros and cons of living in Tennessee in 2023. This is Scott Henninger with the Home Team, where we're working to exceed expectations, whether it's your first home or your last.